Hey, buddy, I want to try to sell you on something. Okay, just tell me if this is interesting or not. Ready?
Ready.
Okay. If there was a situation where there was a great, gigantic, technologically advanced civilization, and just seemingly overnight it vanished to history, lost for thousands of years, and nobody even knew where it went, and nothing existed but the legend, and that was found one day, would you find that interesting?
Yeah, no doubt.
What does it remind you of?
This reminds me of Atlantis, the lost city of Atlantis, like it's underwater somewhere. I don't know.
And the reason that the Atlantis thing captures our imagination is because we never found it.
Right.
There's something, maybe it's Crete, who knows what, and it just fell into the ocean in a day, according to Plato. Well, there is a city called Nineveh that ancient records say existed, that was a part of an empire called the Assyrian Empire that just went away one day. The difference between it and Atlantis is somebody found it.
When?
1800s, mid-1800s. So there's this guy who starts doing all this homework, dusty old tomes, libraries, all of this business, and he starts to think that he might be able to put a red X on a map and go to the Middle East and dig this thing up out of the dirt. But he can only get so close.
So this is like Indiana Jones.
It is Indiana Jones before Indiana Jones. So Austen Henry Layard is this guy's name, and he goes on this gigantic adventure at a time when travel was way harder, out in the middle of this dusty desert, and he asks around, and somebody points him to these two bumps on the horizon, and it kind of matches with his X, and even though he's maybe not supposed to, he goes and starts digging, and, well, he finds something. Ancient documents say it should be there. The Bible says it should be there. There are some old rumors and whispers that say it should be there, but it's just gone. And that means that if somebody were to find it, there would be huge stakes in terms of how people think about the world and history and God and everything.
Really? That's awesome.
I kind of think so.
Okay, so the stakes are pretty high here.
Yeah, one, just because it's awesome and interesting, but two, because of all that other stuff. It has implications.
So Nineveh, like the city in the Bible, that's what you're telling me?
That's the one. Yeah, the one from the old story of Jonah and the big fish.
Okay, so when I read that, it's just like this place that people live over there, and Jonah go talk to him, and he doesn't want to, and all that good stuff. But it's like this physical place that exists. So you're telling me, if I understand correctly, that Nineveh was just a word in a book for a long time, and then it was only recently that it was rediscovered?
That's exactly right.
That's a pretty big deal, for many reasons, I can imagine.
It's a pretty big deal, yeah.
Okay, so I'm going to do the thing where you're the history guy and I'm the science engineering enthusiast, and I'm just going to shut up and I'm going to let you teach me because I don't know anything about this. Permission to ask dumb questions here?
You ask whatever you want. Throw in dumb questions.
Okay, you have the floor. I am listening now.
Understand, I am very excited about this, so slow me down wherever you need to.
Okay, let's do it. Let me tell you what I know about Nineveh before we get started here. So I know that Nineveh is in the book of Jonah in the Bible.
Yeah.
And I know that Jonah was supposed to go to Nineveh, and he didn't, and he ticked off God, and something, he ended up in the belly of a fish, blah, blah, blah. Fast forward to now, and then the VeggieTales made a video about it, and people in Nineveh slap each other with fish. They're fish slappers.
I didn't see that movie.
No, you did not? There was a VeggieTales video, and they are the fish slappers. And
no, I know the Pirates song about the pirates who don't do stuff.
Yeah.
And there's a cucumber character. I just don't know anything about VeggieTales because I'm a very, very bad Christian.
That's all I know about Nineveh. So where is it? What's
they slap each other with fish.
Yeah, that's it. He didn't want to go to Nineveh because they slap each other with fish. That was kind of the reason he didn't want to go in the little cartoon.
I don't think that's why.
So where is it?
So what are the two big giant rivers that flow through Mesopotamia or modern day Iraq? You got that, right?
I'm going Euphrates and the Tigris.
There you go. So it is located right up against the Tigris. And my understanding is that those two channels have evolved a little bit over time as massive irrigation projects have been undertaken. That's right on a fault line, I believe, so that tons of earthquakes in that area. So in the ancient world, I believe, you know what, I can't say absolutely for positive, but I think I'm correct in saying it was on the east side of the Tigris River. It is right next to modern-day Mosul.
I remember being at the British Museum in London, which is one of my favorite places to go when I go to London. Last week was the first time I was in London that I did not go to the British Museum, and that's because I decided to go to an art and design museum instead. But I remember seeing a clay tablet in the British Museum, and it's written in cuneiform. Am I saying that right? Cuneiform?
I hear cuneiform, but, whatever.
Cuneiform. And so I remember seeing on this tablet, it's a ledger that this merchant has written about the sales of sheep and goats and things of that nature. And he's keeping up with like how many he sold for what price. I remember seeing the little triangles because that's what cuneiform, that's the way it's written. You take a reed and it's got a point on the end and you make little impressions in the soft clay, and then you can change the direction of the reed to make different triangles in certain directions, and the depth and how hard you press it determines what the character looks like. And I just remember thinking, man, the situation that went into this merchant's life when he's sitting here writing this ledger, it's really interesting because on one level, I'm thinking about how fast the reed is like rotating in his hand as he's getting different directions on the cuneiform. Like, how fast could he write this? On the other hand, I'm thinking, well, did he have to pay taxes on these goats? And to who did he pay the taxes? And what was the power structure at the time? It's just really fun and interesting to think about all that. But what I don't understand is the massive context in which all of this happened. And I think that's what you're about to tell me today.
Well, that's what's so fascinating about the Nineveh thing in general, is you're asking all these questions. And I've seen those tablets too. I love the British Museum. And the tablet you just described, that is from Nineveh.
Really?
That's not generally from Assyria or generally from Mesopotamia. That is from the excavations at Nineveh that arrived at the British Museum somewhere probably in the 1840s. And it is almost certainly, though there was an incident that makes it hard to say for sure, that is almost certainly from the library of Ashurbanipal. And that's a really hard name to say, but that's kind of the last great emperor of the Assyrians. And he was a guy who, in addition to enjoying seeing the severed heads of his enemies and having the hung bodies of defeated kings swinging in his gardens during tea, he also really liked books and reading. He was kind of refined and cultured. And so he gathered all of this stuff into this elaborate library that he had made in his capital at Nineveh. And then something happened. There was an incident where all of this came crashing to an end, the whole Assyria thing, in one pretty quick instant. And a whole bunch of this stuff, it turned up 2,000 years after the fact. And all of a sudden in this library, you're finding these clay tablets with records of Brian went to buy some goats and he had to pay X number of dollars in taxes. And here's Tad, and he was doing some work as well. And he was working on, this imperial project. And here's what he ordered. He needs some cedar beams and an extra shipment of, this other kind of wood. And here's how much it costs to get that there. Or he's angry because he's waiting and it's a letter demanding that somebody expedite the shipping process. So there's this whole thriving world that we get a little bit of a look at in the Hebrew scriptures, what Christians call the Old Testament. And we get hints of from other ancient Near Eastern sources, but it just vanished to the point that people thought it was fake and a myth. And then all of a sudden, this whole life, this whole United States of America, Western civilization size existence just resurfaces out of the sand over the course of a few years and captures the imagination of people in Europe and the West.
What are you saying? Because you just told me that Mosul is Nineveh. Is that true?
Well, Mosul is right next to Nineveh. So here's the deal. When this was excavated in the 1840s, the location name that was used for these excavations was Nimrod.
I've heard Nimrod. Why have I heard that name?
Well, because the other place in the Bible where Nineveh gets mentioned is, I think, Genesis 10. I don't know, man. I'm supposed to, I literally make videos about the Bible on the internet. It's a very big book. Cut me some slack. I actually have one of those sitting right here. I'm going to see if it is Genesis 10. So Nineveh is one of the most ancientest cities, according to the Bible. And for a long time, Sir Walter Raleigh, I think is the guy it started with, there was a belief among scholars that the Old Testament texts were translated incorrectly and that the founder of Nineveh was actually a guy named Nimrod, who is one of like these proto-human characters from the bordering on legendary past, the very beginning of the Old Testament. Guys like Tubal-Cain and the really, really old school stuff. It is Genesis 10. Here it is. Cush was his father. Cush was the father of Nimrod, who grew to be a mighty warrior on the earth. He was a mighty hunter before the Lord. That is why it is said, like Nimrod, a mighty hunter before the Lord. The first centers of his kingdom were Babylon, Erech, Akkad, and how do you even say that? Calneh in Shinar. From that land, he went to Assyria, where he built Nineveh, Rehoboth, the Calah, some other stuff. And so there's this debate about whether Nimrod was really responsible for Nineveh according to the Hebrew scriptures, or whether somebody else was responsible for this. And so for the longest time, because Nimrod was seemingly credited as the founder of Nineveh, it just got called Nimrod by some. And so Layard actually was referring to this city as Nimrod, not Nineveh, while he's actually excavating Nineveh.
So what you're saying is there's this city that's mentioned and referred to in the Bible as a legit place that happened, and I'm assuming it's referred to in other texts as well?
Yeah, I mean, alluded to, but I mean, the Bible is kind of the main source prior to recent years. Okay,
so the upshot is this place is said to have existed in this important document for Jews and Christians, and if it doesn't, then everything's BS. So it's kind of important that it did actually exist to all these people of these certain faith persuasions.
Yeah, and let me make this really clear. The converse is not true.
What do you mean?
This is only a losing proposition for Jews, Christians, or anybody who acknowledges the Bible. Well, what I mean is, so you go dig up Nineveh, that doesn't prove that like Jesus is the Son of God and everybody should become a Christian or something. It's one of those things like, one time in middle school, I had to wrestle a girl.
Did you really?
Yeah, I did. And it was one of those things where like, well, obviously I better win. But if I win, so what? I beat a girl. But if I lose, oh my goodness, I lost to a girl. Like there's just, in the 1990s as a boy wrestler in middle school, there's really no upside to that match.
My daughter played basketball last winter, and she was the only female in the entire league.
Whoa.
And I said, look, you don't understand the opportunity you have here. You get to take it strong to the hole every single time, and you get to score on boys the whole time. That's a big deal to a boy, and you don't understand that, but it is. So you should just go wide open. You have nothing to lose. If they block you or pack you, as we used to say, then whatever, they feel weird. They do. But if you just go strong and then you score on them, they feel weird. So you literally have nothing to lose, and you can go 100% hard the whole time, and it's going to be awesome. And she totally did that. She became one of the top scorers on her team, her rebounds and stuff like that. It was awesome.
Atta girl, kiddo.
Oh, yeah, it was great for her confidence. Anyway, so we got to find Nineveh. If we don't, we lose. Got it.
Well, again, I don't know that it's necessarily that simple, but I mean, there are other religions that make really bold claims about this was here historically, or that was there, and it's not there. It's not there at all. It doesn't line up. And sane people look at that and they're like, okay, all of the theological claims aside, the thing just isn't where it's supposed to be. I'm sorry, that kind of invalidates your document.
So you're about to tell me that there's some guy that decided he was. So who's Indiana Jones in this story?
Well, I think there are a few of them, but Austen Henry Layard is the guy.
Layard? Spell that.
Layard, Layard.
British guy, I'm assuming, because I've seen the
British guy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is he the reason I've seen all the stuff in the British Museum? Is because of him?
Yeah. Well, he's the one who gets the credit. It'd be much more fair to say he and some indigenous Yazidi people, I think that's how you say it. I think that's who it was. I don't know, maybe Kurds were involved in this as well. I don't know exactly where Kurdistan, where the boundaries extended to at this point in history. But basically, Layard goes on this expedition to Assyria.
When?
And he does that in, I want to say the 1820s was his first trip down.
Cool.
I don't know. I don't have this in front of me, but 1820s-ish. And there was some political stuff going on that made it so he maybe wasn't even actually supposed to be there. He kind of went with more of the ask forgiveness instead of permission approach. And he found some locals who had some memory of where this thing was. But Layard, he didn't go on a half a world wild goose chase on nothing. He strung together 4 or 5 accounts in these dusty old tomes that he found in libraries or monasteries or who knows where you've got these hints that some people traveled through this area as Westerners and heard local rumors about Nimrod or Nineveh being located roughly in this place, and that this hill here and that hill here that just looked like landfill hills, that they were actually this, the ruins of this ancient, amazing civilization. But nobody's really known forever. So literally, you remember like in Indiana Jones when he goes into that library and he's siphoning through stuff to try to find these clues, these hints, like American Treasure, Nick Cage kind of stuff. So he's got these little bit of a hint, these little hints that he's cobbled together into a metaphorical treasure map. And he goes and he finds some locals, and after a bunch of dead ends, some people start to confirm some of these hints. And he goes out, it looks like under cover of darkness, and investigates a couple of these places. And then he just starts chipping away, often at night, with a handful of locals who he's hired. And they're risking their neck, he's risking his. And, well, gradually they start to find stuff, and they figure out they discovered Nineveh. They discovered Atlantis. And the reason that you have heard of Atlantis as being the metaphor for this super secret lost civilization, but you haven't heard of Nineveh, is because they found Nineveh. What are you working on, Mom?
Cooking.
Cooking with what?
Hello Fresh.
That's what I wanted to hear.
We're making Hello Fresh.
Are you?
We are.
What are you making?
We are making bruschetta chicken. It looks amazing.
Have you ever done one of these before?
I have not, but I am having a wonderful time cooking with my lovely granddaughter.
Hey, beautiful. What are you making?
Chicken.
You're in charge of the chicken?
She is patting this wonderful looking crust on top of the chicken.
Okay, you are a cookbook recipe expert. What do you think of the recipe card?
I think it's very easy to use.
Like, really? You just saying that? Because I feel like maybe you're just saying that because I'm holding this microphone by you.
I'm not saying that just because I think it's all spelled out. If you can read, you can do this.
So you think I could do this?
I think you could do this. I think even your dad could do it. No, I think he could. Because he can read, and he's relatively intelligent, actually very intelligent. So he could follow these directions. They're very clear.
What do you think of the ingredients? Did they seem good coming out of the package?
So far, they seem amazing. Everything is nicely in order, and it smells good and looks good, and I'll let you know in about a half hour how it tastes.
Okay. If it's good, are you going to try one of these at home?
I think I probably would. No, I think I would. It's kind of fun. Maybe Dad and I could do it together.
Okay. I'm rooting for you guys. Thanks for making dinner.
You should like it.
I'm going to like it. Are you kidding me?
You have to like it.
That looks amazing.
Not just like it. It's got bacon. What's not?
It's got bacon.
It's chicken and bacon. Yeah, I'm going to be happy.
And mashed potatoes.
Yeah.
Okay. Camilla will be happy. I love you guys. Thank you.
Dude, that's adorable. That is so fun.
I thought so. I was in the other room banging away on stuff. I was working on a floor that needed to be installed, and every time I quit hammering, I would just hear them delighting over this, and my mom, who's been cooking for who knows how many years, explaining to my little girl how this is, and she's learning all this stuff, and it was like school, and then there was happy, delicious dinner at the end.
That's awesome. Well, I think that does the job. That explains what HelloFresh is. They deliver stuff to your house. You just have a recipe card and you get to make stuff. Let's just say the promo code, man. I think that said everything that needs to be said.
I agree. If you want absolutely delicious food with properly pre-measured ingredients and all the instructions you need to cook it delivered straight to your door, you go to hellofresh.com/NDQ80 and enter the promo code NDQ80 at checkout for $80 off your first month.
That is a solid deal. So for $80 off your first month of HelloFresh, go to hellofresh.com/NDQ80 and enter NDQ80 at checkout. Dude, that's cool. Thanks for doing that.
Yeah, thanks for listening in. And thanks to my mom and my little girl for being cool with us sharing that.
That's awesome. How did they know where to look? Layard is his name?
Yeah.
So at some point he has to walk out into the desert and he has to stick a shovel in the ground and jump on it and take out a shovel full of dirt. How did he know to do that? And where did he know? You know the question.
Yeah. So again, it's local insight that I think he's getting here. Have we talked about tells before? What a tell is?
Well, 1 second before you do that, how did he know what locals to talk to? Like he had to get to the local place. How did he know that?
Well, in part, the biblical description would put him on the Tigris River.
Okay.
So, I mean, he can at least get in the zip code, but there was a document, I don't remember who wrote it. I think it was a Dutch adventurer in the 1700s who came back and gave a report of some locals right near what we would now call Mosul being like, yep, and there's Nineveh. Now, a whole bunch of other people write about Nineveh as being completely lost, but surely this is one of the things from 50 or 75 years earlier that would have conjured his curiosity about the thing.
Have you ever seen that map of the Mississippi River where it looks like it's this mighty river in this one location, but once it's plotted through geological surveys over the past 100 or something years, have you seen how much movement there is in a river?
No, I have no idea. Is this like a GIF or something where you see it evolve?
I'm sure there's one online. I mean, it's a famous map that I've seen somewhere. It's like it's got the river in different colors, but we think of these rivers as these mighty things that don't move, but over the course of time, erosion and silt and sediment and things of that nature, especially when you have that much like water moving that much material, it changes the banks of the river. I mean, only recently have we started putting concrete in rivers, in cities and things of that nature. But I can imagine, I don't know, I'm projecting into your storytelling here. I can imagine if a city was on a river at one point in time, the river could move.
Yeah, absolutely.
Is that what happened here?
Yeah, I mean, well, just even in that same neck of the woods, I mean, a big part of Kuwait is relatively new. I mean, you can picture talking about the Mississippi, like the Mississippi Delta. I mean, you're in that neck of the woods, right? I mean, it's kind of crazy. It doesn't look like the Mississippi Delta is really ensconced. It looks like this is still taking shape and becoming what it will become. But when you fly over the Gulf, which I'm assuming you've done a ton, both privately and commercially, what does that Mississippi Delta look like?
It looks like a big swamp, like a really long, wide swamp with a bunch of, I don't know, it's really cool. When you get down in South Alabama and you cross over into Mississippi and move over into Louisiana, it's like you could imagine a squirrel getting up in the morning and then just start hopping from tree to tree and then just not stop. I mean, it's like true wilderness. It's really neat.
Yeah, and for people who live in the western part of the United States, like me, we think of all the wilderness being here. But I flew out of New Orleans a couple months ago with some friends going to Nicaragua, and I was just gawking at this. I had no idea how wild all of that Mississippi Delta was. Who knows what kind of stuff lives in there? It's huge.
Yeah. What's cool is I've spent a lot of time flying over that in a Black Hawk helicopter, sometimes with the doors open. And
of course you have.
It's just unbelievable. Like you look down, you're not that far off the deck and you're looking down and you're like, wow, that is I don't know. It's something I won't forget.
I picture you listening to Creedence songs while you're flying in the Black Hawk with your aviators on. Yeah. And the sides open looking down there.
No,
it just seems right. Like Fortunate Son is what you were listening to the whole time on repeat.
Oh yeah, no doubt. I am not that kind of guy. I don't even do the aviator thing when I'm offered it. But I did one time. My sister was in DC and I ordered a burrito for her to her office when she worked in DC from a Black Hawk helicopter flying over the Mississippi Delta because we were just low enough to have cell phone service. And I was like, this would be funny if I just ordered her a burrito from a Black Hawk helicopter. And then one day I could tell somebody I did it. So I get to tell you that I did that. It was cool.
And the third chair, everyone's impressed.
Yeah, it was pretty cool. It was neat. It's something
I'm impressed.
Well, I'm never going to forget it.
Your hijinks on things like that I have no context. I will never experience those things.
Yeah, it's a chapter that's gone in my life, but it was a really cool one.
It's not totally gone, though, is it? I mean, you still get to do stuff like that sometimes.
Hopefully. Yeah, it's fun stuff. So when they found Nineveh, what then? Like, what do you do when you find a city that everybody thought was non-existent? Do you become famous?
Oh my goodness. Yeah, I mean, you're skipping ahead a little bit there, but yeah, you do become famous. The implications of the reports that were coming back from Layard, they're huge for people. So again, understanding that people see the world totally different than me, and the third chair sees the world totally different than me. But just as a matter of historical record, after the Protestant Reformation, so that's the early 1500s, that's your Martin Luther, John Calvin, that is your European Christians splitting from Roman Christianity, and the Protestant churches like Lutheranism and all of that stuff get founded. After that, you've got this era of Christian scholarship as Catholics and non-Catholics kind of compete to see who can think through theology the best and most convincingly, in part because they all wanted to figure out, what was true because they believe in this God and they care about this stuff, but also in part because there are political stakes. If people are more persuaded by the Catholic version of theology and philosophy and their explanation of the world, then people will gravitate that direction in terms of just their natural political support. Likewise for the Protestant side of things. So there's this enormous energy, and along with that comes the Enlightenment and all of this political thought that's going on. And so you've got this huge shared optimism in Europe from the mid-1500s to roughly 1800, a little bit before, where everybody really believes that through the power of reason and discipline and scouring the scriptures and nature, we can figure things out, make the systems, describe God, solve all the stuff. But then in the late 1700s, on the continent, especially in Europe, you've got some skepticism that starts to come along. And people are like, I don't know that I'm so sure about this Bible thing at all. I don't know that I'm so sure that we actually have the right stuff in there, or that maybe we left some stuff out. And I'm not so sure that the people that we say wrote it actually wrote it. And some of that scholarship is proved to hold up and be important pushback. Some of that proved to be kind of speculative, and history hasn't, borne those theories out well. But whatever the case, you get into the early 1800s, and in America and Europe, there's kind of this culture war going on where people are like, hey, quit picking on my Bible and my Jesus and my Christianity. This thing's really important to me, and it's definitely true and real. And all of these fancy new theories that you're throwing out seem to be very critical of my thing. And so your normal everyday person is feeling a little bit defensive about the Bible and its reliability at this point. Your fancy schmancy, ivory tower type people are saying, oh, there's more to know and understand here, and you guys might be getting it wrong. And so along comes Layard. And one of the big things that people were able to kind of put a thumb in the eye of the religious types over was, well, if your thing is real, where is Assyria? It's like the main foil of the entire narrative of the Old Testament. Your document describes this as being the most powerful people group ever, and they got these huge cities, and it's all gone. So where would that be? And so for your common folk who don't have the ability to go and read the original languages or do the work, they didn't go to seminary, they don't have PhDs in history, to have this report come back and be like, guess what? We found it. It was there all along. It was just under some sand and in some hills. And as proof, here comes the first shipment on barges of clay tablets and reliefs. All of a sudden, all of these people who have a serious skin in the game because they want to be right religiously, they're like, boom, proof. And it was like this huge blow that got struck for more traditional Catholic and Protestant ideologies about how the world is and the reliability of the Bible. And so, yeah, Layard is really celebrated, and everybody has this very vested interest in knowing what's coming back on these barges and what is he getting out of the ground. And people, I think, were particularly holding their breath to find out if any of this stuff was going to answer any questions about Old Testament history or the reliability of it. And, well, then there's a thing that comes along that does.
What?
Do you remember anything from the Old Testament about where Assyria factors in terms of war and all of that business?
No. So what's the difference in Babylon and Assyria?
Great question.
So I remember Nebuchadnezzar and all that kind of stuff, but...
Yeah, good.
What's the difference in Babylon and Assyria?
Assyria comes
wait,
before Babylon.
Hold on, don't tell me.
Go, you got this. Okay.
So in the Old Testament where Nebuchadnezzar's chilling out, no, it's King Darius, mene tekel upharsin.
Okay, yeah.
The Assyrians come and dominate that next day, don't they?
Okay, you are referencing Daniel.
Yes, it's the book of Daniel.
And Daniel is actually much later in the game here.
Okay.
Daniel is getting us into the end of one dynasty and the beginning of another, but you're one empire ahead historically.
If
here.
I'm honest with all this stuff in my mind, I divide it up into good guys and bad guys.
Okay.
It's like, which bad guy was this? Oh, this is the bad guy that used the fancy plates, and then God struck him down by invading him with, Darius the next day, and worms ate his body. And then there's the Nebuchadnezzar. I built the big statue. Like, these are all bad guys in the bad guy bucket in my brain. And so I think in your brain, you've got one good guy bucket, which is the Jewish people. And then you have all these different bad guy buckets where different empires and, they were enslaved to different people because they rejected the words of God and all that stuff at different times. Is that how it works in your brain?
Yeah, kind of. I don't know. The more I learn about this stuff, because remember, I'm two things. My two big areas of interest are theology and history, and they really overlap here. And because they overlap, one pushes back on the other and the other pushes back on the one. And so, sure, yeah, it used to be, well, obviously the story of the Bible is the Jews are the good guys and all the people who believe in God are always right about things and all the people who don't are always wrong about things. But it's not nearly that simple. The good guys are sometimes the idiots and the bad guys, and the Christians sometimes are the problem in the Bible. And the more I learn about the history of the thing, the harder it is to just write off all the Assyrians as just being bloodthirsty monsters. I mean, they were also artists. They also probably built the Hanging Gardens of Babylon. I don't believe that was a Babylonian thing. I think the Hanging Gardens of Babylon were probably in Nineveh. And so, I don't know, everybody's a mixed bag. I mean, it's kind of like you and me, right? I do stupid things, and I'd like to think I do some good things. And even Nebuchadnezzar had good policies and accomplished good things. He just happens to also have ruthlessly vanquished the point of view character of the Old Testament, which would be the Israelite people, the Jewish people in 586 BC.
Time out. You just said the Hanging Gardens of Babylon were probably in Nineveh. I thought Babylon was a city.
Yeah. Here's the very rough timeline. The big players in ancient history that you catch, when you talk about the Bible, of course, Egypt, Assyria, Babylon, and Persia, right?
Right.
Egypt is unto itself. Of course, there were things west of Egypt, but we don't really hear about that in ancient history. Egypt dominates from the Arabian Peninsula west.
Can I try this? So, in terms of leaders, so Egypt, you got Pharaoh. Babylon, you've got Nebuchadnezzar and some other people after him or whatever. Then with, what was the other one you said?
Assyria and Persia.
So Persia is Darius and Xerxes, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so I don't understand who the Assyrians are.
Cool. Here's the funny thing. I think most people would say the same thing. They could tell you something about Babylon, Persia, and Egypt, but Assyria kind of mushes into the middle. Assyria is the foil for most of the Old Testament, and they are this northern Iraqi group that start out as, like so many of these empires, a single city-state. And from that city-state, they become a regional kingdom state. And from there, they blow up and develop, frankly, they just get really good at oversight. They get good at conquering places. They get good at laying siege to walled cities. They were some of the first people to ever employ sapping and some of those different techniques that you and I talked about in the siege warfare episode. But they develop huge, clever advancements in writing, in correspondence, in logistics, and in administration. And that, coupled with their prowess in warfare, is what enables them to become the biggest empire we've seen to date yet, when they become big deals at the beginning of the final millennium before Jesus. So Assyria is going to dominate until the late 600s BC. And at that point, all the people who they've kind of bullied around, people with really amazing pasts and who enjoyed being great kingdoms at earlier points, they finally find a way to coordinate signals and come together and attack their overlord. Babylon is the main player you have heard of who was a part of that coalition. They ultimately defeat Assyria and defeat Assyria very abruptly. The capital city of Nineveh falls. I don't remember the exact year, 612, 609, something like that. And now you have this new thing in its place called the Babylonian Empire, or the Neo-Babylonian Empire, because Babylon had been around for a long time. But what's interesting is that Assyria kind of viewed itself as the caretaker of Mesopotamian, Babylonian culture. And so they fashioned their styles, even their physical appearances, the beard thing, all of that stuff, their gods, their literature, in the pattern of the Babylonians. So you know how there's a Rome, Georgia?
Yep.
And you know how the leaders of Russia were called czars?
Yep.
Or Caesars?
Yep.
And the eagle is the symbol of the United States. All of that is indications of different people saying, okay, Rome was obviously the cultural thing. It was the big deal. And we are now the caretakers of what Rome was. Kiev in Russia considered itself the third Rome. Same thing, same exact thing happened with Babylon. Everybody thought Babylon was awesome, and whoever came to power wanted to keep the culture of Babylon while being the ones in power. So the reason I think it's confusing for smart people like yourself, when they look back on this whole thing, to keep straight how Babylon and Assyria relate, is that Assyria looks just like Babylon, but it's not in the town of Babylon. Does that make sense?
No, it doesn't. Syria looks just like Babylon, but it's not in the town of Babylon. That doesn't help me with my simple question I asked a long time ago, where you said the Hanging Gardens of Babylon were in Nineveh. My question was, is Babylon Nineveh?
Yeah, and the answer is America Rome?
No.
Then why do all of our buildings look like Rome in Washington, D.C.?
Yeah, but I ask you a very simple question. Is Babylon Nineveh is very different than is America like Rome?
No, Babylon is Babylon.
Which is where?
Babylon is Babylon. It's Baghdad.
Okay, got it.
Yeah. But Babylon is also a region, a kingdom at this point in history. So if I say, if it's 100 AD and I say, I'm traveling to Rome, well, that could mean the city of Rome if I'm within the boundaries of the Empire of Rome.
Got it.
But if I'm outside the boundaries of the Empire of Rome and I say I'm traveling to Rome, maybe I'm just going to Turkey.
I see.
Or Egypt or Germany, who knows, right?
Right.
Babylon's the same deal. It's a town and it's a kingdom and it's a cultural style.
I see. Gotcha.
So the Hanging Gardens of Babylon needn't necessarily be in the city of Babylon proper.
Gotcha. I understand.
Cool. Okay. I'm sorry I made it difficult.
You're so far ahead of me on this, man. I'm way behind, and so I'm very ignorant, but I'm learning. This is good.
You're doing a very good job of being patient with me because, I get excited about this stuff when we start rolling. And so thank you for being nice to me while I talk about old dead people, things that I find fun like this. Okay, so this has been a wall of history so far, but here's what stands out to me as one of the really big practical questions that I have. So you've been to the British Museum. I've been there too. One of my favorite places in the world, obviously.
Yep. It's a cool place.
It occurs to me that there are these gigantic things, these Lamassu sculptures of the dude with the beard and the wings and the lion body. There are these huge reliefs portraying gigantic stone-cut scenes of Assyrian conquest. And, I mean, they're gigantic. They're like the size of houses. They're huge.
Are we talking about the... So there's this... You go into the British Museum. In my mind, at least when I was there, they had the Rosetta Stone in this one location. I looked to the left, and they had these
to
big...
the right.
Okay. So...
The Rosetta Stone is, yeah.
The Rosetta Stone's to the right. It's like a hallway, and on each side, it's a huge statue, and it looks like a lion body with, like, wings... and this dude with a gorgeous-looking beard on top.
Yeah, enviable.
I remember, like, lamenting not being able to grow a beard like that. And if I recall, it's kind of fancy hat. And
yeah, like a Shriner hat or something.
Yeah, I remember walking up to that thing and being like, this is amazing. But what was really interesting is I walked to the bottom, the base of it, and I could see things scratched in the rock, like where people had scratched names in the rock and stuff. I remember seeing things like that and thinking that was amazing. So that's what we're talking about? Those big statues?
Yes.
Okay.
So when we were agreeing that you were willing to go on this little Nineveh tour with me in this episode, I specifically asked you to go and do some homework about how they got those things out of the ground and how, with 19th century technology, one would ship that to London downriver from modern-day Mosul. And specifically, we agreed that you were going to shoot me an email in advance so that I would know that you really did the homework. And I have not opened the email. Do I have permission to open your "here's how I would do it" email at this time?
Yeah, to be clear, you asked me, Destin, if you were going to get this big statue, move it from wherever it was in the middle of the desert, if you were going to move it on a boat or something like that, how would you get it in the boat? That was the question, right?
Yes, because this is the stuff you are good at and that you know.
Okay, and so I was supposed to
engineer it for me. That's what I was asking.
I was supposed to write you an email telling you how I would do it, and then go research how they did do it, and then we could see the difference in the two, right?
That is correct.
Okay, you have permission to open the email I sent you before I actually researched it. This is how I would do it.
So this is the speculation email, okay? Opening.
Yeah, I'd like you to read
Destin?
it. Yeah.
In a word, ellipses, all caps, snatch block. Dadgummit, brother, you can do anything with a snatch block. Need to pull an engine out of your truck by hand? Dadgum, brother, just put under an oak tree in the yard. Rig you up a clever attachment of snatch blocks and pull that bitch right out. Shoot! Me and Darnell got our four-wheel drive stuck behind the cotton field on the refuge back in '09. Luckily, I talked him into putting that winch in that. Of course, I doubled down on the snatch block at Harbor Freight, and we pulled that joker right out faster than a black cat out of a tar pit in hell.
That's how I would do it.
Is that how you would say it? Was I even close?
So my buddy
No,
and I...
just hang on a second. First of all, thank you for opening that email with the word "dadgummit" so I would know how to properly read and enunciate what you were saying.
Context clues. So I got a friend, and when we're talking about, difficult things to do mechanically amongst the American South, we always talk about snatch blocks. And you can't just say snatch block. You have to say, did you hear me say can't just say? You can't just say. So it's already happening.
You can't just say it?
I'm transitioning. I have this chameleon thing that happens. Anytime I think about pulling a heavy object, dead gum, man, you know what we need? We need us a snatch block. Hey, Darnell, you got a snatch block in the back of your truck. What I'm going to need you to do is loop that cable over that oak tree limb right there, and then we're just going to park this truck right there. We're going to pull that engine right out. Snatch block will do it. Do you know what a snatch block is, by the way?
No, what the heck is a snatch block?
So basically, it's a hook with a pulley on it. And so what you can do is you can get mechanical advantage. So a lot of people would think that the snatch block goes on the tree side, but the snatch block can go on the truck. Let's say, for example, hypothetically.
I can't even picture what a snatch block is.
It's just a
I
pulley.
wouldn't guess it would go anywhere.
It's just a pulley with a hook. So imagine that you and I are, I don't know, driving on the refuge, as we call it, the wildlife.
Okay.
Hey, man, I got stuck over on the refuge. That's how you say it. So
yeah, I've been there. It's a nice place.
Imagine you get stuck in the mud and you have a cable and you have a winch. How do you get out? What do you do?
I take that cable around something.
Yeah.
And then I pull myself toward that something by retracting the winch.
But you've got a problem, Whitman. You've got a 5,000-pound Jeep that's stuck, and your winch is only capable of 2,000 pounds of pull. Answer, snatch block. So what you do is you can take the snatch block and you can tie it. How do I explain this? So if I'm pulling on a rope, let's say I can put 100 pounds of tension on the rope, right?
Before the rope fails.
No, just with your muscles. That's all you can do. That's all you're capable of doing.
All right, I'm tracking.
So
All
if you put that rope over a snatch block, then you're pulling 100 pounds in one direction in tension, and that rope is going over the pulley, and you're also getting 100 pounds of pull on the rope that's pointed back towards you, right?
Okay, yeah.
Okay, so if you put a pulley on the front of your Jeep and you tied a rope to a tree and you went around that pulley and you stood where the tree was and you pulled at 100 pounds of tension, you would be pulling on the Jeep with 200 pounds of force because you have two ropes pointing at the Jeep and they're both pulling it at 100 pounds. Does that make sense?
It does now that you say it, but I've never really understood how that would work.
It's just mechanical advantage. So all you're doing is if you pull that rope, it's going towards the Jeep. Okay, just imagine in your head, you're standing at the tree. You're looking at a Jeep that's stuck in the mud. You've got a rope going from you to the bumper of the Jeep, going through a pulley and coming back to you, and it's tied to the tree right next to you.
Okay.
If you pull that rope with 100 pounds of force, you're going to be pulling with 100 pounds of force, and the tree's going to be pulling with 100 pounds of force for a total of 200 pounds.
How many times can you do that?
Forever. You can do that as many times as you want. What you lose...
So when we learned about simple machines in junior year physics, this is how a pulley works. I mean, this is the principle of a simple machine.
Yeah, pretty much. But the issue is you have to pull twice as much distance. So if I pull the rope towards me 1 foot, then it's only going to move the Jeep 6 inches.
Oh, yeah.
Got it?
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, and that's how it works when I use that. Okay. Yeah, I get it.
You put more pulleys in there, or more snatch blocks, as we call it, in there, you can get far more mechanical advantage. And then, yeah, that's how it works. So what I would do is...
Can I ask a stupid question here?
There are no dumb questions. Go ahead.
You're absolutely right. That theme keeps coming up. So how do you put them in series? What is the most efficient way to arrange a series of pulleys to get... So let's say I want to pull my rope 1 foot, but I want to get quadruplicate power out of that to move it 3 inches. Does it scale that way?
Do you have a computer in front of you?
Yeah. What should I look up?
Block and tackle.
Okay.
You're going to see this and you're going to instantly know what it is.
Okay.
So Google block and tackle.
Yeah, sure.
A block and tackle is basically 2 snatch blocks, and you've got multiple pulleys on each side. That's how it works. That's how big cranes work. You can use mechanical advantage to lift incredible amounts of lift. So if it were me and I had to move a Lamassu, I would say, "Hey, Ahmed, take me to your nearest snatch block." and
in perfect Southern English.
That's how I would do it. Now, you asked me to research this, and you provided me one resource, or one, what do you call it when it's like a thing that you look up, that's where you find the history facts? What's that called?
I thought resource was pretty good.
Resource?
Sure.
Okay.
One source.
So that one book you gave me, was that the book that this guy wrote? What's his name again? Starts with an L?
It sure is. I literally sent you a primary source by Austen Henry Layard called Nineveh and Its Remains, a narrative of an expedition to Assyria.
It was amazing. I didn't really understand the context of what I was reading at the time because I didn't understand the bigger picture here, but I found on page, it was in the 300s, like on page 340 or something like that. No, it's in that general area.
Okay, I'm going to pull that up and join you.
There's this whole section about how they got these statues out of, moving the winged bull. It's on PDF page 340 on this thing.
Yes.
I
was hoping you would come up with something like this. I'm excited.
Yeah. So
okay, 370.
It's on, like, if you look at the page on the book itself, it's 307, but PDF-wise, it's page 340.
Oh, I got it. Okay, 307. I'm on my way.
Moving the winged bull. So what they did is he went to town and he built this huge cart. And what I found interesting about it is when he went to town, he was like, "Hey, I need a carpenter to build me this thing." And he's like, "Okay, here's the deal. The only type of wood we have in town here," and I'm assuming the town was Mosul, is that correct?
I would assume so, yeah.
Yeah. He said, "The only type of wood we have in town is poplar. We need a wood that has a tighter grain." So he sent a carpenter up into the mountains, and the carpenter came back with these huge slabs, these huge logs that he had sectioned in a specific way. I forget what type of wood they were made out of, and they made a cart. And he bought 2 iron axles from some local French guy that was in the area or something like that. And he had these ropes shipped in from some other English expedition. So he had these iron axles, he had these big slabs of wood, and he had created wheels out of 3 slabs of wood wrapped in an iron hoop. And he just called it a cart. And he said that everyone, when they came into town, for as long as they had the cart there, all they did was talk about the cart. So this thing was like the talk of the town.
Was there a woodcut of the cart? Did you find a woodcut in the book?
I saw a picture, but I did not see the actual cart itself. There's this cart that's in there let's see. Yeah. There it is. Procession of the Bull Beneath the Mount of Nimrod, and that's on PDF page 352. 352.
On my way. Ah, look at that.
And so the way they did that is he said the day they took the cart out to try to get these winged bulls, he said everything in the city just stopped. Everybody was like, this dude, Layard, he's moving the cart. And since everybody knew what was going on, he said like bazaars closed, everything stopped to see them take this cart across the river. Apparently there was some kind of shaky bridge, and he said all these musicians came out, and so it was quite a procession, and they roll up to, I don't know, wherever it is in Nineveh or whatever, and they go to this place, and they come up with this plan to basically take this statue. What did you call the name of the statues again?
Lamassu. I think that's what it's called.
So there's two of them, and they're like, we're going to take this thing down. And so they got all these blankets, and they put these blankets on the side of the Lamassu, and they called it lowering the winged bull. So they wrapped rope. He was talking in this primary source about how he was upset because his ropes weren't that great, but he's like, we'll see what we can do. So he had people down on the ground with these big beams pointing up towards the winged bulls, and they were pushing on it from the ground. You had dudes up on this dirt bank, and they had the ropes wrapped around these things, and they slowly started lowering it down. And he was up on top directing everybody what to do. And he said that when it was going down, everybody was just like so stinking excited. They were screaming, and these musicians were playing. Wow. And he's trying to like tell people, he's like, hey, I need you to drive these wedges right here to take it off the edge of the blah, 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 blah. There were no snatch blocks involved. There was one block, I think they said. But, well, excuse me. So I guess we can say there was a snatch block involved. They said that there was one. Hold on, I got to find this phrase. It was really good.
All right.
The next morning was succeeded away the earth. Hold on. Can I just read this section?
Yeah, please. I don't know anything about any of this, and I'm fascinated.
Really?
No, I really don't know how they got it out.
Oh, you didn't read this? You just left this to me?
No, I left it because you would understand it and interpret it better. I waited for you to teach me.
Oh, awesome. Okay, cool. The bull was ready to be moved on the 18th of March. It had been completely isolated and was now only supported by beams resting against the opposite wall of earth. Amongst the wood obtained in the mountains were several thick rollers. These were placed on the sleepers, formed of the trunks of the poplar trees, well greased, and laid on the ground parallel to the sculpture. The bull was to be lowered upon these rollers. A deep trench had to be cut beside the second bull, completely across the wall, and consequently extending from chamber to chamber. Ropes coiled around the mass of earth served to hold 2 blocks. So there you go. There's your snatch block.
Okay.
2 others being attached to ropes wound round the bull to be moved. These ropes, by which the sculpture was to be lowered, were passed through these blocks, the ends or falls of the tackle, as they were technically called, being held by the Arabs. So one thing that's interesting is he keeps referring to these different people groups. He's saying the Arabs. And listen to this other thing. He says, the cable which was passed through the trench and then round the sculpture was to be gradually slackened by 2 bodies of men, one at each end. Several of the strongest Chaldeans placed thick beams against the back of the bull and were directed to use them in checking it in its descent. So you got these dudes.
Interesting that he calls them Chaldeans.
Is it Chaldeans or Chaldeans? Chaldeans?
I more often hear Chaldeans, but I don't know, these ancient pronunciations. You hear Lamassu as well. I don't know which is right.
My own people were reinforced by a large number of Abu Salman. I had invited Sheikh Abu Rahman to be present, and he came attended by a body of horsemen. The inhabitants of Nineveh and Nimrod, having volunteered to assist in the occasion, were placed amongst my Arabs. The workmen, except the Chaldeans who supported the beams, were divided into 4 parties, 2 in the front of the bull, 1 to hold the ropes, and 2 at the ends of the cable. They were directed to slack off gradually as the sculpture descended. So you got these dudes under the statue with this big log, holding it up like a wedge. They're propping it up. And they're like, hey, we're going to slowly lower this multi-ton statue towards you, and you just kind of ease up as we do it. So
it's like 30 tons is what I read.
That's
like
scary.
30. Yeah. So I hope you've got your log firmly affixed.
Okay, so listen to this. This actually gets very intense the way he does this. The men being ready and all my preparations complete, I stationed myself on the top of the high bank of the earth over the second bull and ordered the wedges to be struck out from under the sculpture to be moved. Still, however, it remained firmly in its place. A rope having been passed around it, 6 or 7 men easily tilted it over. So these guys, you're like, ready? Okay, and they start moving it. The thick, ill-made cable stretched with the strain and almost buried itself in the earth round which it was coiled. So they had it wrapped around the earth and they were slowly letting go, is what it sounds like. And then he says this one sentence, the ropes held well. He wrote that in this book, so you can tell he was very, very concerned about it. The bull descended gradually, the Chaldeans propping it up with the beams. It was a moment of great anxiety. The drums and shrill pipes of the Kurdish musicians increased the din and confusion caused by the war cry of the Arabs, who were half frantic with excitement. They had thrown off nearly all their garments, their long hair floated in the wind, and they indulged with the wildest postures and gesticulations as they clung to the ropes. The women had congregated by the sides of the trenches, and by their incessant screams and by the ear-piercing, and he says a word here, Talhel, T-A-H-L-E-H-L, so apparently that's a type of scream. So the women had congregated by the sides of the trenches, and by their incessant screams and by the ear-piercing Talel, added to the enthusiasm of the men. The bull, once in motion, it was no longer possible to obtain a hearing. The loudest cries I could produce were lost in the crash of discordant sounds. Neither the hippopotamus hide whips of the Kawesses or the bricks and clods of earth with which I endeavored to draw attention from some of the most noisy of the group were of any avail. Away went the bull, steady enough, and as long supported by the props from behind, but as it came nearer to the rollers, the beams could no longer be used. The cable and ropes stretched more and more, dry from the climate as they felt the strain. They creaked and threw out dust. Water was thrown over them, but in vain, for they all broke together, with the sculpture was within 5 feet of the rollers. The bull fell to the ground. Those who held the ropes, thus suddenly released, followed its example and were rolling one another over in the dust. A sudden silence succeeded to the clamor. I rushed into the trenches, prepared to find the bull in many pieces. It would be difficult to describe my satisfaction when I saw it lying precisely where I had wished to place it and unbroken. He did a pretty good job writing that, didn't he?
That's really good. It's captivating.
Yeah, you're like, are they going to break it? And you know the answer.
Well, yeah, I'm looking at a picture of it literally right now. I know it made it. You ever watch Gold Rush on whatever channel that's on, Discovery or whatever?
No.
It's about gold miners in the Yukon and Alaska who try to get gold out of the ground, and they run increasingly complex mining operations each year. But the thing that always creates jeopardy on the show is not will they get the gold out or not. It's machines breaking or having to move entire wash plants. And so they'll do entire segments between commercial breaks where you've got cranes and heavy equipment and things are a little bit jerry-rigged and you kind of have to figure out how to get this done, and tense music to see these crews of 10, 12 guys moving these gigantic pieces of equipment. And I always marvel at their intuition regarding engineering and physics to get this right. Because I'm guessing none of the dudes on that show have got a PhD in engineering or whatever. It's all practical, gained experience from trial and error, success and failure. And they move incredible things, accomplish amazing feats of engineering in like a day so that they can get back to gold mining. And it kind of has the same feel listening to Layard's account of the drama. And how boring to just be like, yeah, then they went and they got the thing and they took it out of the ground. This is way better.
They lowered it with ropes and then it worked. We almost broke it, but it was good. No, he's like, dude, it was so loud. So one thing that was really interesting about all this is, this account, he goes to great detail to describe the noises that he hears. I find it fascinating. We got the Lamassu down on the cart, and man, that was very emotional. So,
yeah, I mean, It sounded like a community event. But I mean, you think about it, the Olympics, you get excited for that. That happens once every 4 years. Maybe people get excited because their guy's going to get elected or whatever. That happens every 4 years. This is once every 2 millennia. And the people there were smart enough to realize what they were witnessing. That is incredible.
It's a big deal. The thing that I found interesting is there's little bitty details that he put in there, like the ropes were creaking, so we wet the ropes. I wouldn't know to do that. Apparently that makes them stronger or not break or something. I don't know those kinds of things.
I lick the loose fly line tippet right before I pull it tight to keep tension knots from happening.
Really?
Like a friction. It can weaken the line if you get that friction knot. So a little bit of spit, or, I guess you could use water, but the spit's right there, will keep that from burning or snapping or whatever. And I wonder if that was just to lighten the amount of friction. I don't know.
I don't know. That's interesting. So what happened after that? They got it down on the cart, and it's my understanding that they drug it out. Like they just got a lot of people. I read one thing that said they had a couple of oxen hooked up to it, and the oxen were like, nope, I'm not going to pull it. So they unhitched them, and then they just used people. Like a bunch of people got on ropes and started toting this thing.
You know what's incredible about that?
What's that?
Is the reliefs that they pulled out of that same tell, that same hole, that depict how those Lamassu or Lamassu got in there in the first place, show exactly the same technology and the exact same technique.
So they put them in the same way they took them out?
I think they must have. That's what it sounds like. There's one relief that shows, a triangular ramp, presumably of stone or earth, and it shows the partially carved winged bull being pulled up that, and there's some kind of slave drivers who are actually riding on the winged bull, which if I were a slave, I'd be like, you're just rubbing it in now. Come on.
You get off of the thing I'm toting,
stand
man.
next to the thing, you jackwagon, but you can't say that because you're a slave and they're hitting you with sticks and whipping you and yelling at you and stuff. So all those people who were pulling that thing into place were foreigners who had been conquered. And the Assyrians did this thing where when they conquered you, they just pulled you straight out of where you lived and they moved you to some other part of the empire to break all of your cultural, relational ties. And in 1 or 2 generations, you'd forget who you were and you would just be a subservient class within Assyrian society. So that's who was pulling this thing back in the day. But what's interesting is that who was pulling it out were the descendants of the Assyrians who had pride about what was being pulled out of that ground.
What I don't understand is why they were just cool with, like, what was his name again? Layard?
Layard.
Why were they cool with him just like toting these statues off? There had to be some incredible political drug deal going on that I just don't understand.
Yeah, I don't know. All I can think is different era, different mentality. You're talking about an incredibly rural part of northern Iraq at that point in history. I mean, I've seen black and white video of later expeditions in the early 20th century and what Mosul looked like at that time. And this wasn't like New York in the 1920s. This is pretty simple, pretty primitive living, even though these seem to be very intelligent people who lived there. And honestly, it seems like there was this window of time from maybe the mid-1700s, maybe even a little earlier, up until, frankly, very lately, where just the difference in technological and economic advancement between the West and the non-West was so shocking that I think there was a deference on the part of a lot of local people and indigenous people that was probably often very misplaced. But think about it. Like if people showed up at your house and they had all kinds of space machinery and like they wore tinfoil and everything and they looked like they were from space and they knew a whole bunch of stuff you didn't know and they had cool gadgets, I mean, you would feel like I got stuff to learn from you and you'd probably defer. And it does seem like it's only very recently that that's kind of evened out and people have figured out that everybody's got stuff to learn from everybody. But back then, I think that's why that kind of happened.
That's interesting. So I'm reading this original source you sent me, Nineveh and Its Remains. It's his book. And at the top of the page, like every other page, has a little topic about what he's talking about in the book at that moment in time, like removal of the winged bull. You know, he's got some people's names here, procession of the bull. That's when they're starting to tote it along. And then I haven't read this yet, But there's some really interesting pages coming up, like Rafts on the Tigris. And there's another one here a couple pages away called Mullah Ali, My Raft Contractor. Embarkation of the Lion. So you can see that he's getting this thing ready to go, and he's putting everything on this boat, and he's rafting it down the river, and then he's getting it on like a real boat. This is fascinating, man. Did you figure out anything about how they got it on the boat and how they got it all the way to England?
No, I saw some secondary sources that talked about it a little bit. I assume they just got a really big boat and put it on there. But the thing that it made me wonder is, okay, if these things are 30 tons, and this isn't the only thing they were shipping out in this particular shipment, how do you calculate buoyancy? Surely there's a way to know in advance that if I put this heavy thing on this floating object, it's either going to float or it's going to go underwater. Do you know how that's calculated?
Yeah, I do. There was this time in my life where I had this dream, and that was to build what's called a strip-built kayak. You ever have a thing like a white whale, like something you want to do, and it's just out there, and you're like, man, one day when I get the time, I'm going to do that one thing. You know what I mean?
Yeah, most of those things don't happen. My friend Adam had one of those things. He wanted to build a hammer dulcimer.
Oh, yeah.
Which included him learning how to build a hammer dulcimer. He doesn't play a hammer dulcimer. He still doesn't. But he just went and learned how a hammer dulcimer was built and then built one over like 5 years.
Oh, he did it? He actually did it?
Yeah, I mean, he's down to like putting shellac on it and the finishing touches.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
For me, it was the strip-built kayak. And so,
okay,
you do all these little weird things, and it's almost like a long, drawn-out lie that you're telling to yourself, for me anyways.
Unless you're Adam.
Yeah, and you actually do it. One of the books I bought was about the strip-built kayak, and it has to do with how you displace water with the kayak. So it can kind of sit proud of the water, or it can sit deep in the water. And
I'm sorry, you're trying to answer my question, but I have a question for you before we get any further down.
Okay.
So by strip-built kayak, you mean you have a solid piece of wood and you remove material to get it to the form of a kayak?
No, forgive me. The way it works is, let's say you have a 2-inch slab of wood.
Okay.
And you would set up your table saw so that you cut little strips off the edges. So you'd have a 2-inch piece by like an 1/8-inch piece, or maybe 3/16 or something like that.
Okay.
And so what you do is you build a frame that goes on the inside of the kayak, like ribs, and then you take those strips of wood and you tack them to the outside of those ribs.
Got it.
You basically put strips along the outside of those ribs, and then you fiberglass it, and that's your kayak, and then you take the ribs out from the inside.
Okay, I have seen that before. I did not know that's what it was called. I guess I was picturing something more like almost a hollowed out canoe, but okay, I am totally tracking now.
Well, you can do the same.
Forgive my ignorance.
You can do the same technique with a canoe, and it's just, the thing is, it's just beautiful. And like, if I were to build something like that, it would almost be sacrilegious to use it on the river. But I mean, obviously, you would have to, because you built a canoe or a kayak, right? So I don't know.
Yeah, you know Samantha, who designed the Hussar pins.
Yeah,
I did the wedding for her and her husband Thomas, my friends. And we did this up at altitude at this high mountain lake in Wyoming. And when we finished the ceremony on the stone beach with snow-capped peaks all around us and pine trees, I made the pronouncement, and they literally just turned around and got into now I know it's called strip-built canoe, and just paddled off into this crystal blue water. It was pretty amazing.
Did they come back?
Yeah, I've seen them since. Yeah, we
you know
ran
what I
into
mean?
them again later.
Was that like, did they have cans dragging around the back of the canoe?
No, but now that you mention it, they should have.
Got it.
Okay, so I'm tracking now. I'm up to speed. Thank you for your patience with me.
Okay, so the way it works is you have this this center line of the canoe or kayak. It's like a centroid, and if you take a weight and you put it below that center line, then it makes the boat incredibly stable. So the best way to stabilize a boat is to have like an incredible amount of weight at the very, very bottom at the keel.
Okay.
You with me? Because it like pulls it down into the water and it stabilizes it. But
yeah, that passes my experience test at least.
Yeah, but what that does is that limits your maneuverability and your ability to turn the thing and all kinds of stuff like that. So you start bringing that weight up towards the center line or the centroid, and it changes the dynamics and the stability of the canoe. So that's why if you're in a canoe, the most stable you can make it is if you're laying down flat in the bottom of the canoe. But as you stand up, it gets more wobbly. So people know this intuitively.
Right.
If I were to do this, if I were to put this thing in a boat, this statue, I would try to figure out a way to get it like down in the bottom of the boat. But how on earth you would get it out from the boat once you do that, I have no idea.
Oh, yeah.
So I don't know what they did here. How much did this thing weigh?
I read 30 tons.
Golly, I need to just go read this original source, but we're recording right now. I don't have time to do it.
We'll have to find out later.
Can we link to the source in the show notes? So like if people click on the show notes for this podcast, they can find this original source?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
On the book itself, it's page 321, but in terms of the PDF, it would be around page 354.
Okay. Can you imagine what it would be like halfway around the world to read all the stories of all these adventurers, dating back to people like Herodotus, who traveled to the east to go and see the remains of the Persian Empire and to report back to Greeks and Macedonians back home? Can you imagine what it would be like to read the stories of adventurers from the Middle Ages during the times of the Crusades and all the way up to the later era of exploration, to have all these people be your heroes, to have them come back with this amazing tale that each provides one little glimpse of this larger, incredible picture of this lost civilization, to add it all up, to pull together the funds because you're now certain enough that you believe it's there, to have people question you and probably ridicule you, and then to go off on this huge journey that would take you away from family and familiarity for who knows how long, and then to finally zero in on this thing and to finally move the right shovelful of dirt and to hear that clink, and then to get down on your knees and shuffle stuff away and to see that cuneiform tablet, or to see the face of that Lamassu looking back at you. Can you imagine?
It'd be awesome, dude. That had to be like incredibly emotional because he knew it was there, right?
He sure thought so.
It's a big...
lots of people have known lots of things are there, right? I mean, there's all kinds of stories from the 19th century, especially of people who were just sure they'd found the thing, and they didn't find the thing. And they went broke, and they became the object of ridicule and scorn back home. But a few of these guys came back as the conquering hero because they found the long-lost treasure.
And that's just the stuff we know about.
Yeah, no kidding.
Makes you wonder if there's other things out there that we just don't know about. Like there's another city somewhere that did something fantastic or had some interesting engineering marvel in their civil engineering projects that we don't even have the ability or the knowledge to do today.
And what could we learn from that? How much could we fill in about the story we know, but how much did those people maybe figure out that we never did figure out? Because there's still all kinds of stuff from the past that we can't duplicate now. I don't know, when you get excited about space stuff, and I like it when you get excited about space stuff. I like Kid Space Destin, and I like that I don't even understand what you're excited about all the time. But the mystery and the wonder of what is out there mixed with the what could we learn that would be practically useful, that's the stuff that I hear from you the most when you talk about it. And this is my discipline's version of the same thing. That question of what's out there. I don't agree that space is the final frontier. I still think there's a frontier here as well, and I'm fascinated by both. I will never go discover a lost civilization.
Why?
I don't know. It's just not my trajectory. I don't think it's what I'm going to do. And also, I think a whole lot of those that were lost got dug up already. But what an amazing privilege to get to be a part of the team that figured that out.
So can we read cuneiform?
Yeah, we can.
I know the tablet said like so many sheep and goats, but like, do we know what it sounds like is my question.
Well, cuneiform is a script, not a language.
Okay.
So in this case, the Akkadian language was being written using cuneiform script. So in the same way that Spanish and English are both written using Latin characters and Arabic numerals, so it is here. So cuneiform doesn't sound like anything, but Akkadian does, and I have no idea what, and I'm not sure if people really have any sense of how it sounds, but we can figure out what it means.
So what do you think did this civilization end? Like they were there and then they weren't, and then everybody forgot about them. Like, how does that even happen?
Right. Isn't that fascinating? You're talking about a conquest. Well, lots of people get conquered and their stuff is still there. I mean, the Israelites got conquered, but a few hundred years later, well, less than that even, they were able to go back and dust things off of Jerusalem and rebuild the walls and start fresh. So what I think is unique about this one is that the socioeconomic political climate forced the surviving Akkadians, or Assyrians rather, to go north and west. And to this day, that is where the remnants of Assyrian society continue to exist. So effectively, Assyrians who are still around today, they're Christians, and they have been for a long time. That's kind of just been how that played out. But it's a relatively small and not influential group of people in terms of a nation state from here on out through history. So Nineveh gets abandoned, and we know it had to have been abandoned because all of the library is still there, or the parts of the library that would have stood the test of time. Babylon didn't want Nineveh. We also know that Layard discovered skeletons unburied inside the walls of Nineveh, which means that this sack was quick, it was violent. People took what they wanted, but they weren't really excited to take the cultural remnants of Assyria with them. They despised those things. Those were probably images of oppression. So they took the stuff that had tangible value, left the stuff that had cultural value, and then did not repopulate Nineveh. And the remaining Assyrians could not come back and repopulate Nineveh, which in part would have been very difficult to sustain because it was like 18 different irrigation canals and all this other stuff. It was just too expensive to keep open, I would assume. And so the capital of the Neo-Babylonian Empire is in Babylon, a few hundred miles south, and just nobody lives there. But then what happens is, well, did you in your reading come across what these structures were made out of, what they were built out of?
No, I'm assuming it's just stone, right? Like granite?
Well, you would figure because the sculpture is all out of stone and limestone, granite, etc. But the actual building of the 3 million bricks that were used in building Shalmaneser's palace, they're made of mud. So this is mud brick material. I guess if that's maintained and repaired, that could last for a very long time. But part of the way a tell forms is when, through abandonment, the mud bricks that make up the walls and the city start to break down and collapse in on themselves. Because what does a mud brick become when it loses its density and its form? I would assume it would break back down into its elemental units. I don't think it would just stay a brick forever if it were, exposed to weathering. And I think that's how a tell forms. You get sand blowing over stuff.
What is a tell?
So a tell is an unnatural hill in which the remains of an abandoned civilization or city or whatever can be found. So if you go around the ancient Near East, you can see tells all over the place. Some have been excavated, most have not. And it's just this odd-shaped mound. It almost looks like ramparts or one of those earthen forts from the Middle Ages in Europe.
Yeah.
And so you can tell, there was a civilization under there. It's just, it's very expensive and difficult to excavate. And so most of them still just look like hills.
Oh, man. So we potentially have a ton of different Pompeiis under there. Maybe not like Pompeii's because they were captured in the moment. But, man, that's cool. Archaeology is awesome. Wouldn't it be cool to be an archaeologist?
That's what I wanted to be when I grew up. That was my thing.
You can still do it.
Well, now I really like doing this other thing I do, though. So I don't know. I would love to be on a dig sometime and put actual time and effort, not as a novelty, but really help with something like this.
That'd be cool.
I sort of have the background to do it. I could help.
The question remains, why did they take this stuff? They took it to the British Museum. Why did they do that?
Well, not just to the British Museum. I mean, there have been tons of successive expeditions here. They're digging on multiple sites from Nineveh, and some things are being stolen and put on the antiquities market, theoretically illegally, but a whole lot of stuff is being distributed to a whole lot of different places, and a ton of these artifacts are still or were until recently, right there in northern Iraq.
Oh, dude, you're going to bring that up?
That is probably the most history angry I've ever been in my entire life.
So you're talking about the ISIS dudes with sledgehammers, like that was here. That was Mosul.
That's exactly where it was.
Oh, so the stuff they were smashing was from this civilization.
That's exactly what it was. So one of
Okay, for the third chair, can you just explain what they were doing?
You bet. I'm sorry. Yeah, I let my emotion get in the way because this makes me very angry. ISIS, the Islamic State in Syria, Islamic State in the Levant, sometimes they're called ISIL. In the mid-2010s, their base of operations was Mosul, and their intent was to establish a new radical Muslim caliphate. They were opposed by the West. They were opposed by a whole bunch of other Muslims. But ultimately, they were really tough to root out of northern Iraq, eastern Syria. And I don't know, it stinks that this was a really violent expedition of bloodshed, particularly against Christians, the descendants of the Assyrians who are Christians now. The Yazidi people were on the hit list. The Kurds were on the hit list. This was ugly. But the other thing that they did was just to stick a thumb in the eye of the rest of the world. They just started dynamiting and sledgehammering and bulldozing all of these Assyrian monuments and walls and buildings, just wrecking everything that Layard and everybody else who came after has done. And just in case somebody's like, oh, well, they were wrecking stuff that colonizers came in and did, you got to understand, Iraq has been on board with this, and Iraqi thinkers have been behind excavating this stuff. And it's been a joint effort as we've moved forward in history. This is not just the story of 19th century colonialism. This is a story of partnership and agreeing that we want to unwrap this present together, and for ISIS to come in like idiot thugs and do what they did. Well, you can tell it conjures tremendous emotion for me.
I saw the videos, and it's like you got this old statue, and I think let's just try to articulate what the intent was. Well, first of all, they were hijacking religion for power, I think, personally.
I think so.
Yeah, so what they were trying to do, or the statement they were trying to make, was there's only one God, and that's Allah, and anything that says that it's anything close to a God is, I don't know what the word is they would use, sacrilegious,
it's idolatry,
blasphemy, I don't know.
Yeah.
So they're like, well, we got to destroy this. So they started smashing it, like with sledgehammers and hammer drills. I just remember watching the news and thinking to myself, well, let me ask you this. Is violence justified against those people?
You know how I feel about violence.
Yeah, I do. So the question is, they're sitting there smashing your junk, man. They're smashing thousands of years of history. They're trying to eliminate a culture from the history books.
Yeah.
You saw what they were doing. You know the intentionality they were using.
It's appalling.
Would you use violence to stop them?
I mean, this ticks all the boxes for me. I don't like killing anybody. But on top of that, I mean, they're killing Christians, this tiny, tiny little age-old population of people that I feel a tremendous affinity toward. I was mad at them when they were killing not Christians. I was mad at them when they were killing Christians. So emotion gets in the way here. Yeah, I have to admit, when that stuff was going on, I wanted them obliterated, just wiped off the face of the earth. I don't like how we always prosecute warfare, and I don't like bloodshed, but I would be lying if, as much as I want to come off as eternally consistent, I would be lying if I didn't admit that I wanted to see them absolutely crushed militarily when that was going on.
So I've got this mental picture of you in a suit on a stage, like at a debate, and your political opponent's like, Mr. Whitman, when is it okay to be violent or carry out, an execution of punishment involving death? And you're like, under no circumstances is violence allowed, or should it be authorized?
I've never said under no circumstances.
And then your political opponent's like, but they hit a statue with a hammer, and you're like,
okay,
warheads on foreheads. Let's go.
Don't we all have these vulnerable spots in our attempts at consistent thought and ethics? Oh, man.
Golly. Yeah, I think I know what your trigger is now. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to get little statues of things you like, and I'm just going to call you and be like, hey, Matt.
It's not going to work. Honestly, if you came into my office right here and you just smashed my Champion of the Manatees trophy that I got secondhand from George Bush's brother, who was Jeb Bush, made the Champions of the Manatee statues.
Yeah.
I wouldn't
no
want to
doubt.
kill you at all.
Oh, okay.
It would never cross my mind to kill you over that or anyone. It just wouldn't. So it's not any statue. I don't just love statues. That's my point.
Those punks, man. I mean, they were just smashing stuff. Oh, God, it makes me sick.
They're punks.
So
They made Islam look awful. They made themselves look awful. And they were murderous and horrible. And they did other things that don't even bear repeating. That, to me, is about as vile a bad guy as we have ever seen in our lifetimes.
I think so. But one thing that it makes me think about is we've got backups of like all my data from me shooting videos of the Smarter Everyday YouTube channel. I've got like hard drive backups of all the stuff I've shot.
Yeah.
And the gold standard is to have a separate backup in an offsite location.
Right.
So one thing that makes me think about is culturally, we don't have cultural backups often unless somebody swooped in and did a grave robbery or something like that. Now we've got an Egyptian mummy in the British Museum. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
I think what we need is we need to do a little cultural swapping and stuff. So we need like some bluegrass banjo concerts in Beijing, China. Or yeah, I don't know what I'm trying to say. I don't know what I'm saying, but I mean, like, it's interesting
We have
that
that in common.
backing up cultural things is not really something we do.
What do you mean by backing up cultural things? I'm just not tracking with the concept, I guess.
I don't really know what I'm saying. Like, it had Layard not taken these Mesopotamian statues and taken them on a cart, on a boat, and taken them all the way to London, then we wouldn't have those things because they'd be smashed.
Right.
The only ones that existed would have been smashed.
Because one rogue set of idiots came along and decided to do it. And isn't that the principle of the UNESCO World Heritage Sites and things like that, is there's just some stuff we shouldn't smash. And look, I disagree with the Assyrians. They were really, really mean. And mean to people who I even happen to agree with a little bit about some stuff. They were kind of the bad guys for everybody but themselves. But also they were enormously talented and interesting. Like, if the only standard we use to measure what we preserve is if we totally agree with it or not, nothing will ever get preserved. You have to overlook that stuff historically and just appreciate the legacy of, frankly, very complicated, conflicted, and messy characters and people groups from history. And so, yeah, it's stomach churning to me to see what happened there. And I am grateful that stuff from most of these types of 19th century excavations have been distributed all over the place, because then we won't have another Library of Alexandria situation where all of the historical eggs are in one basket. And if that basket burns to the ground or falls into the harbor, you're just out of luck, I guess. So I think this is your best case scenario.
That's interesting.
You know, when the Allies were coming to get ISIS rooted out of Mosul, one of the threats that they made, in addition to, killing hostages and things like that, was if you cross a certain line in the sand, we will bulldoze and detonate the remaining walls and structures of Nineveh.
I don't know what happened. Did they do it?
I think they tried, but I think the Allies got there. I don't know if you call them allies. I think that's what we called it. The coalition got there faster than they could destroy things.
Wow.
I think.
Golly.
Yeah. So, for example, one of the gates of the walls of Nineveh had been restored and rebuilt. There's pictures of it on the internet right now. You can just go Google like Nineveh Gate, and it'll be the first thing that'll come up is this part old, part new restoration of this gate, and it is gone. It's a pile of nothing now.
Punks, man.
Punks. I agree. Can we just make a blood oath covenant that we will never try to destroy all the remaining art of a civilization? You and me will just never do that.
Yeah, let's just don't do that.
Oh, man. Thanks for...
How do we make a blood oath covenant? Do we like grab behind each other's thigh or something? Isn't that
No,
how that is?
it has to be blood. And I have got this recurring zit. I don't know if it's a bug bite or what, but it's on the back of my neck. And if I just kind of pick at it a little bit, I get a little
No, we're
tiny
good.
bit of blood. No,
We're
I'm
good.
doing it. It's important to me. There we go. It's not much, But
So
there, blood oath covenant. I bled.
I'm ignoring you because we were in a good place. Now you're in the weird place. But what did we learn from all this?
Really, that's the weird place just now. What we learned? Well, I don't know. What'd you learn?
I mean, for me, I didn't realize that Nineveh was lost to civilization for thousands of years, and then some guy went out into the desert and found it. I mean, that's amazing.
It's amazing.
Yeah, it's like finding Atlantis, and he did it.
Yep.
And then he drug statues back home. He's like, "Hey, told you."
Imagine that homecoming. Hey, check out this thing I got on this boat, guys.
Yeah, that's fascinating. What about you? What'd you learn?
Well, I learned what a strip-built kayak is. I knew what those looked like, but I didn't know the name, so I'll look smarter at parties where that comes up now. I learned things that I intuited about buoyancy, but that I now understand better. I learned things about simple machines that I didn't understand before, or at least hadn't thought about for a very long time. But can we just agree that the biggest take-home from all of this, with all the mystery and wonder and everything else, is that no matter what your problem is, just use a snatch block.
Yeah, man. Go get that snatch block. Let's hook it up to the bumper there. We'll have that joker pulled right out. Just get a snatch block, man.
Okay, I'll just get a snatch block.
I really enjoyed learning this. Thank you for teaching me.
Cool. Thanks for doing it.
Rock and roll, man. Have a good night, dude.
You too, buddy. Catch you soon.